Good evening and welcome. My name is Julie Botel. I'm on the Riviera Beach City Council, and I'm pleased to welcome you this evening to the third of a series of art exhibitions that we're having here in our beautiful Marina Event Center. This particular one highlights the work of R.L. Lewis, who was a member of the Florida landscape artist tradition that's known as the Highwaymen. And we have his son here today to tell us all about his work. Thank you very much for attending.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Commissioner. I'm certainly appreciative of any opportunity I have to come and speak before such distinguished people. You know, there's a proverb that says your gift will make room for you, put you before great people, and I know I'm speaking and standing before so many great people. So I'm very thankful to Dr. Lowe, who is a beacon in the community, does a lot of wonderful things, and she thought it okay to call me at the very last minute to invite me. So at the very last minute, I'm certainly here. A little correction on R.L. Lewis, who's my dad. He's R.L. Lewis Jr. I'm R.L. Lewis III. And the boy wonder, R.L. Lewis IV is home, I believe. He should be home because he's 18, so he could be out and about. So nevertheless, she said he was an original Highwayman artist. Actually, he still very much is, and is very much actively painting. And some of the paintings shown here, with the exception of the Afternoon on the Loxahatchee, the one in the direct middle, all the other paintings are contemporary paintings, things that he's done within the last 2 weeks to a month. He's quite active as an artist, and he always talks about how a gift is meant to be shared, not snared. Now, as we talk about that nickname, Highwayman, be reminded that that particular nickname has been used at least 3 times in world history. The initial group of highwaymen were an infamous bunch, that being the English robbers, the bushwhackers, called the highwaymen during the medieval times and thereabouts. The second group of artists were actually musicians, and that being Johnny Cash and Waylon Jennings and Willie Nelson. These were some of the original highwayman artists who took their musical wares and instruments and played in honky-tonk bars and in back corners and what have you, insofar as that is concerned. Now, this particular group of artists, that being called the Highwaymen, that nickname did not come about until 1994 when a collector by the name of Jim Fitch coined that phrase. And what it connotates to us today, contemporarily, is these artists, that being Black Florida landscape painters. There were 26 of those artists, and there is one female in that group, the late Marianne Carroll, who passed over a year ago. But today, of the original Highwayman artists, there is 11 alive and 7 still actively painting. And my dad has long since been one of the more prolific of the artists in this particular class. The first painting Highwayman was the legendary artist Harold Newton. He started painting as early as 1952. The technique that they used is called the wet on wet technique. Now, defining Highwayman, it's the nickname given to Black Florida landscape painters from the 50s, 60s, and early 70s. And these artists marketed the sell of their art to banks, attorneys, businesses. For the most part, they weren't allowed in museums or galleries, so they took their art directly to the people. So it is essentially grassroots art. It's art. The distinction they carry is they're Black artists that dare to paint Florida themes and scenes, not necessarily Black themes and scenes. Now, with that said, if Dr. Lowe called me and says, "Hey, Robert, I want you and your dad to get in the paint lab and do the Jenkins house for us," well, that's what we consider Black art. It's art that's relative to your history, your heritage, your family. So she hadn't called yet. I was just plugging that in, throwing that in, whatever it's worth.
It's coming.
Okay, all right. You heard that. I'm glad that was caught on recording, on video and such. So we'll look forward to painting the Jenkins house. You know, as a matter of fact, the doctor and I are going to work together. She doesn't know it yet, on the sights and scenes in Palm Beach County. I think that'd be a nice 6-pack of paintings, don't you?
It'll be great.
Oh yeah, that's an exhibit. We just created one. We spoke it into existence. And Miss Lupe, you could participate also. You can be one of those artists. We play well with others. So thank you. As we go back to the definition, Highwayman art defined, you all that are historians, I'm a former high school history teacher. I'm big on history, and especially my own and my own family's history. But this particular class of artists, if you know a little bit about art history, will be known, or at least compared favorably to Hudson River School of Artists. That's America's first collective group of landscape painters that dared to paint American themes and scenes, not European themes and scenes. In this particular class of artists, that being these black artists, dared to paint Florida themes and scenes. As a matter of fact, coincidentally, I convinced my father over 20 years ago. I said, I don't want you to paint anonymous paintings. So now you can be talking to he's 80 years old now, so you can imagine him at 60 looking at me like, who are you to tell me what I should paint? And I said, well, if you have a theme, it doesn't necessarily completely define you, but it identifies you. Much the same as the nickname Highwayman. All it did was give it an identifiable name to the art that's been here as early as the 50s. Also, that identifiable name gave it a reason to be collected. Because in a collector-driven environment, as long as people can identify it by its name, they can look for it. And they can appraise it and apprise it. For the most part, the value of the art will increase as it becomes identifiable. So he said, well, since you're so smart, what's my theme? I said, you know, I meditated on this, and I think your theme should be to capture Florida as art history on canvas before it disappears. After all, you're a lifelong teacher of this style. And when he likes something that I say or come up with an idea, he doesn't necessarily define it with a smile or, oh, good idea. He just goes with it, that kind of thing, you know. I'm a little different with my son. You know, we have a lot more of a love fest, not to say that me and my dad don't, but you know, it's what's that thing on the internet, what have you, mother's daddy type, girl dads. That's over there. No, it's dad and son type thing. I like the way that sounds a lot better. As my dad used to say, you want to be a man, be for the most part raised by one, be around one, and I still think that holds true for kids in general. Period. Nevertheless, as we go through the chronological history as it relates to Highwayman art, we do have the second painting Highwayman in this group, the legendary, still living at 89, R.A. McClendon, and some of his work is shown outside. I think Dr. Lowe's collected some, and I have also. And certainly he's an indelible artist in this class of artists. But as we talk about some identifiable things as it relates to the artist, outside of ethnicity, they have geography in common. Most of the artists are from the Treasure Coast, as it's called. I think, is Palm Beach part of the Treasure Coast, or it's just the Palm Beaches? That's right.
Gold Coast.
The Gold Coast.
Gold Coast.
I thought that was Miami.
We're up to Palm Beach.
Okay, all right, okay. I won't take that away from you. All right. Ms. Dr. Lowe was Miss Palm Beach at one time, so you know. Okay. All right, so the Treasure Coast housed about 17, being Fort Pierce, about 17 or 18 of these original Highwayman artists, as they're called. And 5 of the original artists are actually from a little subdivision called Gifford, Florida, which is in Indian River County. As a matter of fact, they didn't find themselves as the Gifford 5. The only living of that group is Willie Regan. That Gifford 5 included Alfonso Pancho Moran, the Buckner brothers, George and Ellis Buckner. Harold Newton was born in Gifford, and Willie Regan. And as I said before, he's the only living of that group of artists. Now, my father is actually the only of the original Highwayman artists born and raised in Brevard County, that being the Space Coast. And funny enough, or quaint enough, when you get tight in your life, when you get ready to make an investment, it's always the worst time. You get tight and you reason your way out of something. Well, 20 years ago, I'm at an early on exhibit, and there's some paintings of my dad's. They're 1224s like this size. And coincidentally, they're river scenes. There are a lot of greens and neutral colors in it. And in the distance, it has missiles shown. Well, the lady only wanted $100 a piece for them. And I looked at it and reasoned my way, I'll get it next time. And of course, that was someone else. You know, as we say, opportunities are never really lost. They just go to the person ready to receive them. And I wasn't ready to receive them for whatever reasons. But I went back to my dad and I asked him, I said, that was a really interesting painting. It was very eccentric. He said, what was in it? I described it. And the last thing I pointed out was that it had a missile shot in the back. Well, my dad actually worked for Boeing for a brief period of time in his life in Lockheed. So he says, well, doesn't an artist paint where he is? That was the end of that discussion. So as we talk about the nickname, it came about in '94 when a collector coined that phrase. starts to chronicle and identify these artists by name and geography as well. And then the next step, from 95 to 2001, some interesting things start to happen. This art that was considered motel art is now being shown in museums and galleries around the state. And I can get long-winded about between that period of 95 to 2001 because I was a teacher, ironically, at Lincoln Park Academy in Fort Pierce. And so I was in the middle of all these artists and didn't know it. But anyway, from 2001 to 2004, this art becomes that much more highly collected and appraised. There are People Magazine, Southern Living, different places and points in history. And March 24th of 2004, all of these artists are inducted in the Florida Artist Hall of Fame. That being my dad and all the other artists. What are some of the other things that have happened? Well, there's a license plate that's on the horizon. It will be depicting these artists, their imagery and what have you. There's also a museum that is actually being started in Fort Pierce, a former police substation. I was at the meeting a couple of months ago, and that'll be a brand new Highwaymen Run museum. Actually, the artists themselves, those that are living and what have you, will be participating in the leadership on that. So a lot of really, really nice things have happened. As for my dad and myself, when I told you I encouraged them to have a theme, what birthed that theme was a relationship with the citrus industry, the Florida Cattlemen's Association, Southeast AgNet. We get email attachments that say, "Dear Mr. Lewis, I live, work, or play in the middle of a picture. Can you paint it?" So that's the neat thing that's come from that. I always think that it's a wonderful thing that a living artist can receive he or she's flowers well before they're gone. Oftentimes we talk posthumously about important people, especially in the art world, and I'm happy to say that he's still very much alive and well, and participating in the activity that made him who he is today. I'm very thankful for the opportunity to speak before you. I am available. My ability is in large part predicated on my availability, so I make sure I'm always available to my audience. I do feel that I've made a little Florida art history with you today, and I hope that in some way, shape, or form that you got some Highwayman Cliff Note education. And if you are interested in participating in purchasing an original, limited edition print, I now have t-shirts, postcards, note cards, and Dr. Lowe convinced me to have shawls. So I know the beach is on the horizon, so I'm coming up with a lot of different accessories.
Do you have calendars too?
I do have calendars that will come out in late
Calendars are
June,
great.
July. They were formerly in Barnes & Noble before the Rona, and we're looking to pick that relationship back up. And they will be available on my website, and certainly quite reasonable. So thank you again. Oh, also we do have instructional DVDs on how to. And we do have a snippet, am I correct, of my dad from a few years ago painting live. So please enjoy the view. If you would like an original, you can accidentally get one from me today. I'm available. Thank you so much.
Wasn't that just wonderful? Do we have enough time? Are we gonna show this, the when I went to now? Okay. I like to tell stories too, so I hope we have time for 2 more stories.
Well, Dr. Lowe is a wheeler and a dealer. The first time we met her some years ago, she negotiates everything out, you know.
Mr. Robert Lewis, and he is one of the original Highwaymen, and he is still one of the lucky ones that has been able to continue creating art. And he's going to tell you his life story because it's so interesting. But I'm going to just let you take the show away. His son, Mr. Robert Lewis Jr., will kind of talk
Florida Highwaymen. We cannot have an art exhibition with landscape art without including the Florida Highwaymen. We have some other contemporaries. We have Lupe Lawrence. We have some other great artists. But it is so important that we capture Florida history. And a lot of it's not captured. It really is not. The one story that I'd like to talk about, if I could, James Gibson was one of the other very, very phenomenal Florida highwaymen. And when he was out at Grassy Waters a few years ago, he said, someone knocked at my door and I didn't know who the person was. And I guess I should go back just a little bit. There was a movie out it was called Catch Me If You Can. Leonardo DiCaprio was in it. They had a scene when he was a pilot, I believe, down in Miami. And Steven Spielberg, I think it was, said, I really want some Florida art in the airport. And they commissioned, I believe it was James Gibson, to do the artwork. So they put it out in the airport. So if you're looking at the movie sometime, Catch Me If You Can, you will probably see a glimpse of it in the movie. But it was interesting. And a couple of years later, I believe, Steven Spielberg showed up in Fort Pierce at James Gibson's house. And James Gibson really didn't want to answer the door. And they said, oh, there's a limousine out there. That really is Steven Spielberg. He said, really? He said, I was going to call the police because I thought this was someone faking me. Sure enough, he said, well, he has to wait now. So Mr. Gibson had to go back in, shower, dress, put on a suit, look presentable before he would go to the door and greet him. And so I understand he had said, I really want some more of the paintings because he and Leo DiCaprio had been spawning over who was going to get the pieces that had been in the movie. So that was just really, really fascinating to hear about that. So I think we need to work a little bit harder to capture some of the greatness that we have right here in Florida. And I believe there was another story that I don't recall all of it, something about NASA and the work that your dad was doing with NASA. You all said something about that when you all were out at Grassy Waters.
Well, what it was the original shuttle, the space shuttle, that was on the horizon in the late 70s and then the early 80s. There was an older gentleman, and I kicked myself in life. I had an art gallery, and we called it Painting Heaven. It was actually no bigger than this room, but the ceilings were 18 feet high, and the building, the square footage was only 800 square feet, so that's about like this. But because the ceilings were so high, we had sleeves and what have you, like you have outside, and so everything was shown up high. And we even had the little shopping retail hook where you could go up and get a painting. And in the rafters, we had older paintings. And then I had, in the middle aisles, we had cones, these wooden cones. So you walk down Painting Heaven. At all times, it always had at least 100 paintings in it. Mostly Lewis, but some of the other highwayman artists and what have you. So a gentleman comes into the gallery, and he has this 48 by 60 plus rolled up canvas. And he comes in and he says, I don't want anything. He says, I just can't keep it in my house, and I'm getting older, and I just want you to have it for a while. And he rolled it out, and it looked like Jiminy Cricket on the show with the saddle and everything, and him holding on. And it was actually wherever they went in the country to show the shuttle and to show it off, to advertise it, they had this scuttlebug, as you would have it, on the back, riding, holding on for dear life as the shuttle was ascending on high. And we kept that for the longest time. And he just came back after a year and got it. And I said to myself, there was no way I shouldn't have. I have this thing with my dad, for every hundreds of paintings he will do, I'll take 17 to 20 and put aside to be shown in a limited edition print series. As a matter of fact, this painting here of the Loxahatchee is one of those such paintings. It's been in our calendar, it's part of a limited edition print series, and every time I bring it out, everybody likes it. So I try to select some that are unique and certainly authentic paintings that are original, that are that the populace will gravitate towards. So that's what she was talking about, the scuttlebutt side of it. But she mentioned James Gibson, the late James Gibson. He died at 17. He was possibly our biggest competition, and I have some of the most hilarious stories about James Gibson. What's the biggest hotel here? It's like the Taj Mahal.
Breakers?
The Breakers. Yes, he was the featured act at the Breakers. This was about 8 years ago. And so my dad was sick. He was going through some things health-wise. And so he was so sick that he was in the hospital. So this exhibit was gonna go on. I'd gotten invited to the Breakers, but he was the star attraction. And you know, he always wear the suits and everything. And you know, the Lewises we come a bit raggedy sometimes, and that was a bad day for me. I didn't know where the Breakers was, and I got there late. And he had specialized parking and everything, and I see his little name and everything, and they send me to the other side. Because you know, you just got in, and there's a piano there, and when I get to the Breakers, and they gotta have me in this corner over here, about like this. And I'm just out in the corner, you know, and my dad, I see him before I come to the Breakers, and he says, "Who's gonna be there?" And I said, "James Gibson's gonna be there." And my dad smiles from under the wraps, and he says, "Are you gonna give him a run for his money?" And I says, "Yes, I am." I said, "Because you want me to, I'm gonna do it." So I get there and I set up. He comes fashionably late, you know, with his little entourage and everything. He walks across the room and he's smiling, he looks over and he sees me, and I show all 1,000 teeth. Like, here I am. Well, the only problem with that is I had some dynamite stuff. I think some of the stuff I have here today is pretty nice, but I had big, majestic royal poinciana scenes and so on and so forth. And I had the fortune of meeting the person that was over the event, the president of the event. And he comes over and he has an angry look on his face, and he says, "My wife sent me here." He says, "She walked by this display and she saw this painting. Write it up." Oh, when I write it up. And I start writing up stuff, and I write up stuff. And by the time he gets there, I look over at him and I said, "How you doing?" He walks over and says, "Where's your old man, boy?" And I says, "Well, he's been under the weather." He says, "Well," I said, "He's in the hospital." He says, "Oh, too bad." He says, "How long you here?" I said, "I'm gonna be here as long as you are." And he looks at me, I darn near sell my whole display, and I walk by him, and I says, "You gonna be here tomorrow?" He says, "Yeah." I said, "Me too."
Not a great story, thank you. You know, we should always be sure to mention, I really would like to pay homage to Mary Ann Carroll. They call her the First Lady of the Highway, because she was the only of the original Highwaymen, the only female.
Yes.
And she has some wonderful work. I think we have some of her work out there. And I think we should not forget to mention A.E. Beanie Bacchus, who really helped a lot of the original artists, Harold Newton and all of them. And so often people see, when they want to come down and visit and take away what they see, because other people say, "We don't see cotton candy clouds." We said, "We have that in Florida." You know, and when they see, this theme is supposed to be talking about landscape artwork as well as tying it in with mental health and all of the stress, especially what our children are going through right now, and everyone. But it's very, very, very important. And when you hear some of the artists talk about, Lupe was very good in doing that last month too, but when they talk about the cotton candy clouds, the spiritual birds, you usually will see birds, Florida birds, in the Florida Highwayman art. So when you see those spiritual birds in there are so many messages in there that are so important, that gets people into the paintings, that get people to have some release, and to start feeling good about some things, and finding out, even through all this adversity and all of the negative things that are going on, somewhere the Creator has left something very, very positive for us to appreciate. So I think it's so important, because a lot of times children don't get a chance to express themselves unless you give them pen and paper or give them a musical instrument to play. But a lot of times they draw, they color, and they paint, and that really helps them to express what's going on with them. And a lot of times it gives them some release. So I think it's really, really important that we recognize our artists, that we cherish them, we embrace them, and we give them a chance to show their artwork. And I guess that's what we at Artist Showcase have been trying to do for so long. A lot of these artists, like Mr. Lewis just said, they had no place to show their artwork. So they stuck it in the trunk of their car. And they drove along the highways, and they stopped at banks, hotels, dental offices, doctors' offices, and had them to put the artwork on the wall. So it's a great, great, great rich history. And I could go on and on and on, but I think this has been a very, 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 very good event. I really thank the CRA and the City of Riviera Beach and the Marina. We have a wonderful venue for all of this to be here. I'm just hoping that we're gonna have this show up for nearly 2 months. So maybe we'll even have a chance to have a closing show, and maybe a couple of the other artists to be able to participate and show up.